Chapter 31, Mermen and Mermaids. Jon stood on the deck as the ship pulled into the docks, feeling a stirring within him. There was something special about returning to the north. While Casterly Rock in the west had felt more like home than Winterfell, deep down, he was of the north, and it felt good to be back. Looking around, he could see that the other northerners shared his sentiment. Small Jon was practically bouncing with joy, though whether it was the thought of being back in the north or the allure of northern ale, Jon couldn't quite tell. Daisy, Ser Jorah, and Lyness also looked happy to be back on northern soil. Lyness had surprised Loras with how much she had embraced the north, and Jon sensed there was much more to her than Loras had anticipated. It seemed that the ladies of the Reach were made of sterner stuff. He glanced down at his belt, where her favor was now tied, and smiled. He had known that to be true ever since the tourney at Lannisport. Ser Wendell stood nearby, grinning as he looked at the dock. Jon tried to see what caught his attention, and it didn't take long for him to recognize Ser Wylis among the crowd. Beside him were several guards and, at first glance, what appeared to be two young girls, perhaps Ser Wylis's daughters, Jon thought. To Jon's left, however, was the most excited of all the travelers. Ever since they had entered the Bight, Ghost had been eager to stay on deck. Last night, despite Jaime's protests, Jon had slept outside with the wolf. He found a quiet corner sheltered from the wind and brought a blanket, which was soon joined by the large white wolf curling on top of him. Loras had offered to join him on deck as well, but seeing his friend shiver in the cold, Jon had insisted he go back below deck. When he finally drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of who he believed to be his mother, a young, beautiful girl riding a black horse. She rides like she was born to do it, her hair flowing in the wind and her laughter echoing. Just thinking of her brought a smile to his face. "Looks like someone's happy to be home," Loras said as he approached from behind. Don't you feel the same when you return to the Reach?" Loras's smile was answer enough. "How long will we be staying here?" "I don't know, a few days at least. We need to buy horses and carts, supplies for the night's watch, and a cloak for a very cold boy from the Reach," Jon joked, and Loras playfully shoved him. "Have you ever been here before?" Loras asked. "No, until Lord Jaime, I hadn't been anywhere. My brother came a year before I left, but I was." Jon began, but the sound of Jaime's footsteps cut him off. "I think it's time we got the horses ready, Jon. I'm sure Winter will be delighted to stretch her legs properly." Jon replied, taking a last look at the docks. He spotted the wolf's den and smirked as Ghost rested his head on the side of the ship, gazing longingly as the docks grew closer. It took them less than an hour to dock. In that time, Jon had saddled both Winter and Honor. He led them from the hold onto the deck and down the gangplank, where Ser Wylis was thankfully finishing up the introductions. Walking forward to Lord Jaime, he handed over the reins and greeted Ser Wylis. Jon was grateful that horses had been provided for everyone. Though it wasn't a long journey to the seat of House Manderly, he would prefer to ride rather than walk, and had the horses not been provided, he wouldn't have ridden without Loras. "She's a fine animal, Jon," Ser Wylis said as he mounted Winter. Ser Lord Loras's brother breeds both hounds and horses, isn't that right, Loras?" Jon, it is. Willis has garnered a great reputation for both," Loras replied proudly. "Well, looking at Jon's mare here, I'd say it's well-deserved," Ser Wylis smiled before adding, I heard about the joust, Jon." "Really? It's been talked about here?" Jon replied, surprised not just that it was being discussed, but that the news had already made its way north. Wendell mentioned it in his raven to let us know about your visit." "I had no choice, Ser. He insulted my mother, and by doing so, my father," Jon said firmly. "You did right, lad. I wouldn't accept an insult to my family either. I wish I could have seen him fall, though." Wendell said it was a sight to behold. "Just thinking about it had my father laughing for days," Ser Wylis chuckled. They rode on, laughter and banter filling the air. Behind them, the carriages carried Lady Lynesse and Ser Wylis's daughters, while Lord Jaime, Ser Jorah, Daisy, and Small Jon were grouped together. Jaime's loud laughter echoed as Daisy teased Small Jon. Ahead of them, Ser Wendell and the Karstarks seemed engrossed in conversation. As they passed through Fishfoot Yard, with its fountain that fascinated Loras, they entered the Seal Gate and continued toward Castle Stair, each step bringing them closer to the new castle itself. To Jon, White Harbor was an impressive city. While it wasn't as large as Lannisport, he found it far more beautiful, with its white walls and marble mermaids holding bowls that Ser Wylis explained were filled with whale oil, lit at night. When they reached the new castle, even Jaime seemed impressed. Jon turned to look at him. The Wolf's Den had been built by the first men and gifted to the Manderlys when they were exiled from the Reach. But the new castle was the home they had built for themselves, a reminder of their time there. It was far more elaborate than most of the typical functional castles in the north, and Jon found it a welcoming sight. "I'll have some guards take your horse to the stables, Jon," Ser Wylis said, gesturing to the standing guards. "I'd better do it myself, Ser Honor too. I'm still a squire after all," Jon replied with a smile. "All right, lad, I'll send some guards with you anyway. When you're done, they'll take you to the Merman's court. Come, Lord Loras, I'm sure my father will be pleased to meet a lad from the Reach," Ser Wylis said, a smirk on his face. Loras glanced at him, while Jon simply nodded. Dismounting Winter, he walked her over to Honor and took the other horse by the reins. Ser Wendell had already led Lord Jaime into the castle, leaving Jon alone except for the guards in the courtyard. At that moment, Ghost decided to make his reappearance. The wolf had practically jumped from the ship when they docked. Looking at him now, Jon could tell he'd soon be hearing tales of the trouble Ghost had caused. The white wolf's fur was matted with what appeared to be a mix of pastry and butter. Jon watched, amused, as his wolf tried in vain to lick it clean, his tongue just not quite reaching the mess. Unable to contain himself, Jon laughed at the sight. But his laughter was cut short by the sound of alarm ringing in his ears. He could hear the footsteps of the guards approaching, and a quick glance at Ghost showed him the wolf's back arched, ready for action. "There's the beast," shouted one voice. "To arms," cried another. "Relax, there's no need to worry," Jon said, trying to soothe the rising tension. Though his words didn't seem to have much effect on himself, they at least calmed the guards a little. "Ghost, sit," he commanded loudly, and the wolf looked at him, almost as if asking why he was speaking. Thankfully, he understood the message and settled down, allowing Jon to breathe a huge sigh of relief as the guards lowered their weapons. Jon walked over to Ghost and rubbed his head before turning to the guard who appeared to be in charge. Looking closely, he could see the resemblance to the Manderlys. He searched his mind for memories of his lessons before finally recalling the man's name. "Forgive me, Ser Marlon, I should have kept better control of him," Jon said apologetically. You should, lad." What is that?" Ser Marlon asked, eyeing the creature. "It's a direwolf, Ser." "His name is Ghost," Jon replied, slightly offended that Ghost was referred to as just a thing. "A direwolf," Ser Marlon echoed, incredulous. Ser. My name is Jon Snow, and he's my companion." Jon almost laughed as Ghost shot him an annoyed look. "We heard tales you had a wolf, Jon Snow, but no one dared imagine he was that large. He's mostly harmless. I promise I'll keep a better watch on him. See that you do. I'm to escort you to the Merman's court. Normally, I'd tell you to leave the wolf behind, but perhaps it's best to bring him along," Ser Marlon said, shaking his head. Jon nodded to Ghost, and the wolf sprang to his feet, following Jon as he walked past a young boy and girl who were watching him with great interest. Jon noticed Ghost sniffing the boy before licking the girl's hand, which made her giggle. He turned to say something to them, but they both walked away. After a moment, he followed Ser Marlon, though a nagging feeling in the back of his mind suggested he should have followed the children instead. White Harbor was a pleasant surprise for Jon. He had enjoyed riding through its bright streets. It felt like a proper city, unlike anything he had seen on his last visit north. As he walked through the castle, he couldn't help but smirk at the decorations that lined the way. Mermaids and mermen adorned every corner. What made houses want to display their sigils so extensively? His father had his lions, the Baratheons had their stags, the Starks had their wolves, and the Targaryen dragons were everywhere. As he gazed at another merman holding a trident, he chuckled to himself. At least they were far better than trout. What's so funny? Daisy asked, appearing beside him. Nothing, just thinking about how much better a merman is than a fish, he replied. The laugh she gave in response almost took his breath away. It made her beautiful in a way he had rarely seen in women before. His sister was beautiful too, but that was only skin deep. Queen Riella appeared almost otherworldly, much like most of the Targaryens depicted in their portraits. At Harrenhal, Jaime had briefly encountered Lyanna Stark, and there was a vibrancy about her, a spirit that he found incredibly captivating. It was easy to see why Rhaegar had fallen for her. He had also seen Ashera Dayne, his mentor's sister, who was truly worthy of Saln. Her striking purple eyes and dark skin made her uniquely beautiful. Yet, ever since watching Daisy swing a mace, Jaime felt he had never seen a woman as beautiful as she was. He often had to remind himself not to stare at her, and when their eyes met, his heart would race, leaving him flustered. Shaking his head to clear such thoughts, he entered the merman's court. The floors and walls were adorned not only with images of mermen and women but also with all kinds of sea creatures. Around him, men and women filled the tables. Some were ladies, while others were soldiers, a surprising mix that intrigued him. He glanced at Daisy, who was smiling at two young women sitting to his left. Up front, on a raised chair, sat none other than Lord Manderly. "Lord Jaime, I bid you welcome to White Harbor," Wyman said, a broad smile on his face. "It is an honor to be here, Lord Wyman," Jaime replied with a small nod. "Ser Jorah, Lady Linnes, it seems your family sent visitors upon hearing you be arriving so soon," Wyman added, gesturing toward the two women. "Aye, it's good to see them, Lord Wyman," Jorah said, returning the smile. "This lad here, he's not Jon Snow?" Wyman asked, a look of confusion crossing his face as he glanced at Loras. "No, my lord." "May I present Lord Loras Tyrell, my squire," Jaime said, as Loras stepped forward and bowed. "Welcome to White Harbor, Lord Tyrell," Wyman said, a glint of interest in his eyes. "I thank you, my lord," Loras replied. Loras replied, "Is young Jon not part of your party, Lord Jaime?" "He is, my lord, but he's putting the horses away, as is a squire's duty," Jaime responded, pleased to see the almost proud nod from the lord. "Tonight, my lord, we shall feast you. For now, though, I shall have my men show you to your quarters. Should you need anything at all, feel free to ask." "I thank you, my lord," Jaime said, turning to leave just as Ghost stormed into the room, followed by an exasperated Jon. "Come back here." "No, Ghost, stop," Jon called after him. Jaime couldn't help but smile at the scene unfolding before him. The direwolf had dashed to the nearest table, nearly knocking a man to the ground in his haste to devour the pie that had just been placed there. Ghost's front paws were perched on the table, his snout buried in the pastry, while the sounds of tearing crust mingled with gasps and boisterous laughter from Lord Wyman. "Get down from there, this instant," Jon shouted, tugging at Ghost, but the wolf was too caught up in his feast to comply. Finally, once the pie was gone, Ghost allowed himself to be pulled away, looking up at Jon with his head lowered and tongue lolling out. "Really? Now you want me to give you water after that?" Jon said, chuckling as the wolf rubbed his head against Jon's hand. When Jon turned to see everyone in the room staring at him, Jaime almost laughed at the embarrassed expression on his face. Lord Wyman, however, was laughing heartily. My lords and ladies, I present to you Jon Snow and Ghost the Direwolf. Lord Wyman announced, as if unveiling a performance. Jaime glanced at Jon, who merely shrugged before joining in the laughter that spread through the room. A nervous servant approached Jon and handed him a large bowl of water before quickly retreating. Jon couldn't help but laugh even louder at the sound of water being lapped up by the clearly thirsty wolf. He then turned to Lord Wyman and said, "It seems you used too much salt, my lord." The large lord nearly burst from laughter. I've been telling them that for years. Come forward, young Jon. Let me take a look at the boy who's done so much for my house. Jaime watched as Jon stepped toward the front of the hall, Ghost trotting alongside him, clearly satisfied after his pie escapade. When Jon reached Lord Wyman's seat, Jaime was surprised to see the hefty lord rise and approach Jon. Without warning, he embraced him like a long-lost son, catching both Jon and the rest of the hall off guard. Wyman stood before Jon, his eyes scanning the young man's face. After a moment, he nodded and smiled, while Jaime looked on nervously. "You have the look of your father, Jon, though I dare say Ned was never so pretty," Wyman remarked, prompting laughter from the room. "Perhaps I take after my mother more, my lord," Jon replied, and Jaime had to stifle a laugh. Indeed, she must have been a lovely lass. "Come, Jon, sit. I know you wish to get to your rooms, but I'd like to speak to you, if I may." "Of course, my lord." "I'd be honored," Jon said. Jaime considered staying, but when he looked at Jon, he saw him nod, signaling that he'd be fine. So, he, Loras, and their guards made their way to their rooms, while Daisy stayed behind with what Jaime learned were her sisters. The small Jon and the Karstarks, however, seemed more eager to indulge in the northern ale than anything else. As Jaime and Loras walked down a long corridor, they were guided to an elaborate set of rooms. "My lord, this is your room. Lord Loras is down the hall, and there are a couple of rooms for your guards. The rest are welcome to billet in the barracks," the slender man said. "I think my captain can find them rooms at a nearby tavern." "If you could recommend one, I'd like to treat my men while we're on land," Jaime replied. "Of course, my lord. I'd be happy to help." "And where's Jon's room?" "Jon, my lord?" Jon Snow, my squire," Jaime said, a hint of concern creeping in. If they had placed his king in inferior rooms, he would not be pleased. My apologies, my lord." Lord Wyman insisted that Jon be given a room in the family wing. Jaime smiled, surprised by the unexpected gesture. Was it because Jon was his liege's son, or was it due to what he had done for them? Perhaps the crafty old lord had something else in mind. Whatever it was, he would find out soon enough. Meanwhile, Loras was feeling the absence of Jenna's fussing. He had hastily packed his belongings and now couldn't find one of the warm undershirts he had bought in Gulltown. Those undershirts had been lifesavers during their journey through the Bight, and now, in White Harbor, he knew he needed them. The problem was, he couldn't locate them. He was certain they were there, but where? When he heard a knock at the door, he groaned. It can't be time yet, he thought. He opened the door to find Jon already dressed, a large smirk on his face. "Really, Loras? You must do better," Jon said, mimicking Jenna's tone quite well. "Get in here, you fool." Loras replied, feeling the chill in the air as the door remained open. "Looking for these?" Jon held up the undershirts. "Wait, how did you hide these on me?" Loras asked, slightly annoyed. "No, you fool. Somebody put them in the wrong trunk. Now, who do I know who's empty-headed enough to do such a thing?" Jon joked. Loras couldn't help but laugh. The two trunks did look similar. Jon's was made of a much darker wood, but both had been bought by Jenna. He took the undershirt and quickly put it on, dressing himself as fast as he could. Just as he was checking his hair, another knock interrupted him. Thankfully, Jon answered, leaving Loras to finish getting ready. There you are, Jon. You should have let me know where you'd be, a tall girl with brown hair said. Indeed, sister, how very mean of him, a younger girl with a small frame and blonde hair chimed in beside her, a smirk on her face. Lady, it seems my friend needed some help to look presentable. Loras, are you ready yet? Jon called out. Loras cringed at the teasing tone in his friend's voice, especially with the giggles of the two girls nearby. I'm ready, Loras replied as he walked to the door. Finally. Lady Winifred, Lady Willa, may I introduce Lord Loras Tyrell? Jon said, bowing dramatically. Lord Tyrell, may I present Lady Winifred and her sister, Lady Willa Manderly, whom we have the honor of accompanying tonight. My ladies, Loras said, executing a perfect bow. Well, at least this one knows how to bow properly, unlike you, Jon, Willa teased with a mischievous grin. Lord Loras is far more refined than me, my lady. I'm just a northern savage, Jon replied, earning more giggles from the girls. Shall we? Lady Winifred said, extending her arm, which Jon took. My lord, Lady Willa said, a bigger smirk now on her face. My lady, he replied, taking her arm as well. As Jon and Winifred chatted effortlessly in front of him, Willa turned out to be an absolute chatterbox, flitting from one topic to another while giggling every few moments. However, Loras felt decidedly uncomfortable when they reached the rest of the party, all waiting to enter the room. Ahead of him stood Ser Wylis with a woman who was clearly the girl's mother. Lord Jaime stood beside Lady Dacey, while Ser Jorah and his wife positioned themselves behind them. Loras noticed a few other men he didn't recognize, including a small man who was watching Jon intently. After a few moments, the music began to play, and they started to move forward, stopping at the entrance to the Merman's court. A herald stepped in and began to announce them. Lord Wyman Manderly, the Lord of White Harbor, the Warden of the White Knife, the Shield of the Faith, Defender of the Dispossessed, Lord Marshal of the Mander, and Knight of the Order of the Green Hand. Lord Jaime Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock. Warden of the West, Friend of the North, Loras said, glancing at Jon, who was staring at a bewildered Jaime. It seemed Jaime hadn't expected that last title either. Loras quickly turned his attention back as Lady Dacey was introduced. Ser Wylis Manderly, heir to White Harbor, and Lady Leona Woolfield. Ser Jorah Mormont, Lord of Bear Island, and Lady Lenise Mormont. Lord Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch. At this, Jon's head snapped around to the small man who nodded and smiled at him. Loras watched as the two exchanged glances, with Lord Jaime observing them both. Soon enough, they began walking inside, with Lady Winifred nearly dragging Jon along. The hall was even more extravagantly decorated than before. Torches flickered, casting shadows against the walls, while bowls of fiery liquid added to the ambience. Jaime, Lady Dacey, and the others made their way to the high table, while Jon and Loras were led to a table at the front, surrounded by the younger folks of White Harbor. Jon's gaze locked onto a young boy and girl already seated. The boy wore a serious expression, his green eyes sparkling as they met Jon's. The girl, clearly his sister, was older but shared the same brown hair and green eyes. Mira, Jojen, Willa said as Loras pulled her chair out for her. Willa, the girl replied with a smile, while the boy remained silent, his eyes fixed on Jon. Have you met Lord Reed's children before, Jon? Winifred asked. No, my lady, I haven't. Though we almost crossed paths earlier in the courtyard. We would have stayed longer, but you seemed a bit busy with your wolf, the girl said with a smirk. Where is Ghost, anyway? Loras inquired. He's asleep in Jon's room, the boy replied, his voice sounding far older than one might expect from such a young child. How did you know that? Jon asked, curiosity lighting up his expression. Jojen looked at Jon with a hint of curiosity. Just a guess, Jon. My name is Jojen, and this is my sister, Mira. We've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Really? Why? Jon asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Loras felt a wave of discomfort wash over him as Lady Winifred settled beside Jon. Our father speaks of you often, Jon, especially you and your white wolf, Mira said with a warm smile. Loras was relieved to see Jon relax a bit at her words. I must thank him then. He, my uncle, and Lord Manderly are the reason I have ghost, Jon replied. I'm sure father will be pleased to speak with you, Jon, Jojen added. Come on, this is a feast. Let's have some fun, Willa chimed in from beside him, and Loras chuckled, feeling the tension dissipate. Jon sat there, looking at Jojen with an unreadable expression. It seemed that every time the boy spoke, Jon's guard went up. Lady Winifred said something that made him laugh, but Loras couldn't help but notice Jojen's unwavering gaze on Jon. Daisy surveyed the lavish spread before her. By the gods, the Manderlys could throw a feast. She wondered how many courses it would take before anyone felt full. Looking down the table at Lord Wyman, she guessed maybe just a few more would do the trick. Lord Jaime had been particularly attentive that night. He had smiled at her dress and complimented her more than once. Maybe she would even get a dance with him later, she thought, glancing down at her sisters seated near the front. Having Jory and Lyra there was a pleasant surprise. Seeing them sit with Torin, Harayon, and the small Jon almost made her wish she were at that table. But the man beside her made her glad she was where she was. Her sisters had teased her when they first saw the golden-haired Jaime Lannister, both claiming he was even prettier than she was. But when they noticed how genuinely interested she seemed, they stopped the ribbing and became very supportive, boosting her confidence. Daisy had sensed a shift since being around him again. His attentiveness tonight made her wonder if something might blossom between them. But just then, fate intervened. To her left, Lyness had barely touched her food all evening. When her cousin's wife grabbed her hand, Daisy immediately knew something was wrong. Are you all right, Lyness? Daisy asked, concern lacing her voice. Can you take me to the privy, quickly? Lyness replied urgently. Come on. The two women stood up and hurried to the nearest privy. However, unfamiliar with the keep, they soon found themselves at an empty garderobe. Thankfully, they discovered a privy inside, and Lyness rushed in. Daisy turned to give her some privacy but was nearly pulled in with her. Within seconds, it began. Lyness started to vomit, despite having eaten little. For the next hour, Daisy stood by her side, holding her hand and finding a damp cloth to wipe her face. They chatted about trivial things to pass the time while the sounds of music and dancing drifted in from the hall. Daisy longed to return to the festivities, but she wouldn't leave Lyness' side. Lyness had become a close confidant, perhaps even closer than her own sisters, none of whom shared her interest in more ladylike pursuits. With Lyness, she could talk about dresses and embroidery without fear of judgment, even when she was clad in armor. How are you feeling? Daisy asked gently. I think I'm better. Is there any water? Lyness replied. I'll get some. Daisy moved to a nearby table, grabbed a jug filled with water, and filled a cup. She handed it to Lyness, watching her swallow eagerly before asking for another. Once Lyness was satisfied, they settled into the chairs, Daisy still holding her hand. When was your last moon blood? Daisy inquired. I don't know, a couple of months ago, I think, Lyness responded, her voice faint. Of moons, no, 3 moons ago, you don't think? I do. You're with child, Lyness, Daisy said, watching the smile beam on her friend's face. I should see a maester, but not here. Perhaps at Castle Black? Are you sure, Lyness? Wouldn't it be best to know for certain? No, I want to meet your uncle, Yora's father. He couldn't come to the wedding, so we can go to him. Besides, if Yora knows, he'll make us go back to Bear Island. You're right. Just, be careful, all right? I will. Thanks, Daisy, for being here. Of course, Daisy replied, hugging Linnes. By the time they made it back to the hall, the dancing had mostly ended. Jaime was talking to Jon in the corner, but he smiled at her when he saw her enter, making her heart flutter. She walked with Linnes back to the table. Jorah looked at his wife with concern, but she just smiled and nodded before taking her seat. A few minutes later, Jaime approached while Jon returned to his table. Lady Daisy, Lady Linnes, I trust all is well. Jaime asked, glancing between them. It's fine, Lord Jaime, though it seems I missed the dancing, Daisy said coyly. Indeed, my lady. Though I have no doubt our host will throw at least one more feast before we depart. Of that, you can be sure, my lord, Jorah said, clearly happier now that Linnes seemed in better spirits. So, what did we miss? Daisy asked as both Jaime and Jorah laughed. What? Where to start? How about a clearly drunk Smalljon trying to dance while being hit by Jory, or Loras basically being dragged around the floor by Willa? No, not enough. Then there's my other squire being the belle of the ball. Jaime laughed loudly now. Jon? What do you mean? Linnes asked, her interest piqued. It seems your niece has been giving him lessons, my love, something the young ladies appreciated. Jorah laughed. It seems once the ladies saw a boy who could dance, that was it. He practically ran to me as soon as the dancing was over. Jaime glanced over to where a miserable-looking Jon Snow was being teased by Loras. Surely Loras had lessons too, she asked. But unlike Jon, his politeness didn't extend to dancing well. After stepping on Lady Willa's feet one too many times, he found his services no longer required, Jaime replied. Now I really hope we get another feast, Daisy said, smiling. As do I, my lady, Jaime said, his gaze lingering on her. Wyman had been delighted when he heard that Lord Jaime and Jon Snow would be joining his son on his return home. He had long wished to meet the young man who had done so much for his family. The fact that the boy continued to contribute to both his family and the North intrigued Wyman. When Wendell arrived earlier without Jon, he had felt a twinge of disappointment. Still, he was glad to meet Lord Jaime and looked forward to getting to know him better. But it was Jon Snow he was most eager to see. Luckily, he didn't have to wait long. When Wyman finally laid eyes on Jon, he was stunned. He had heard that the boy was the perfect image of his father, and while he could see the resemblance, Jon was far too pretty to be all Stark. Watching the lad with the wolf was an experience in itself. Wyman was impressed by the control Jon exhibited, but it was his attitude that truly caught his attention. To say the lad was confident would be an understatement. Reflecting on how far Jon had come from that quiet boy he had met years ago, Wyman felt thankful once more for Jaime Lannister. His time in the West had done wonders for Jon, which in turn had benefited Wyman and the North. As he sat at the high table, looking out at those feasting, he recalled their earlier conversation. Well, young Jon, it's good to see you again after all these years, Wyman said. You too, my lord, Jon replied. Thank you for bringing Ghost to me. It was very much appreciated, Jon said. Think nothing of it. You should also thank Lord Reed if you ever get the chance to meet him, Wyman replied with a hearty laugh. I'd be more than happy to, my lord. I heard about what happened with the fish in King's Landing, Jon. You did? I wasn't sure that would reach all the way here, Jon said softly. It did. You made the North proud, lad. You made your family proud, Wyman said, noticing the surprise on Jon's face. You think so, my lord? I do. I heard how he acted. Wendell's Raven made it clear, you were standing up for your mother and father, if I read it right. I was, my lord. He insulted them both and refused to apologize, Jon said indignantly. Well, you knocked him on his arse, didn't you? Taught him not to mess with a wolf, didn't you, lad? Wyman chuckled, and this time, Jon joined in his laughter. Do you think Lord Stark has heard about it, my lord? I reckon he has, Jon. But you are in the right. Don't let anyone tell you differently, lad. I won't, my lord, Jon said emphatically. Good lad. Now go with Arlene to your rooms. We'll speak later. White Harbor and its lord are most pleased to have you here, Wyman said with a smile, which Jon returned. As he looked down the table, he spotted Howland, a surprise he was still processing. It had been almost 8 years since he had seen his old friend, who preferred to stay in the neck rather than venture out. The last time Howland had left, he'd likely saved Jon's life, so Wyman felt a sense of obligation to him that others in the north might not understand. He wouldn't allow anyone to speak ill of the Crannogmen in his presence because of that. But seeing Howland leave the neck and arrive here at the same time as Jon Snow felt far too convenient to be mere coincidence. Wyman had only spoken to Howland briefly to welcome him, but the very fact that he had come was significant. Wyman's curiosity was piqued, especially when he noticed that Howland had brought his children along. That had Wyman scrambling with questions. What was Howland doing here? Why now? What did this have to do with Jon Snow? Wyman was convinced that Jon was the reason for Howland's visit. If there was something significant going on, he intended to find out. If it could help Jon, he was determined to be involved. After all, he owed the boy. When Wendell informed him about the changes he had negotiated in their deals, Wyman was astonished. He had been planning to send Wylis to speak with Lord Tyrion about expanding their operations into Essos, but he had hesitated, knowing it would limit their activities in Westeros. Now, it seemed Jon had once again found a solution. And what a solution it was. In one stroke, he had likely made the Mormonts the second richest family in the north, while also benefiting both the Umbers and the Karstarks. You're saying this was Jon's idea, son? Wyman asked. Aye, father, it was. Ser Jorah is overjoyed. The deal with the Umbers still needs the Greyjohn's approval, but he'd be a fool to turn it down. As for Lord Rickard, the benefits are massive. The boy continues to amaze me, Wyman said. What was the joust like? Father, you should have seen it. You too, Wylis. I've never witnessed anything like it. On the first tilt, he took a heavy shot that should have unhorsed him, but somehow it didn't. The second tilt, though, he lost his shield and almost fell from his horse, clearly the effects of the first tilt. But how he managed to win, I don't know. He caught the fish square and knocked him flat on his backside. Wendell said, and all three laughed. He's a good horseman, then? Wylis asked. I've not seen a better one, Wendell replied. You've never seen the Lady Lyanna ride, have you, son? Wyman interjected. No, father, Wendell answered. The girl was like a centaur, I'll tell you. There was no better horseman or woman in the north. The she-wolf would leave us all in the dust, Wyman reminisced. Maybe he takes after her, then? Wendell suggested. Wylis said, mayhap he does. Wyman nodded, his eyes glazing over as he thought of Lyanna Stark. The she-wolf was just what House Stark needed right now. He had been disappointed in his liege lord during the few visits he'd made since Jon Snow's departure. There was a lack of recognition for the boy, and very little mention of him at all. Apart from the oldest daughter, who surprised him with her fondness for Jon, no one seemed to miss the lad. He shook his head. Tonight was a time for celebration. Tomorrow, he could worry about such things. He planned to speak with Lord Jaime and Howland to learn more about what his friend was up to. He also wanted to ask his granddaughters for their impressions of Jon. Both had danced extensively with him, and Winifred had seemed especially happy about it. For now, he would enjoy the rest of the feast, even as it wound down for the evening. Meanwhile, in his room, Jon lay in bed, feeling more exhausted than he had ever felt after sparring or dueling. He had danced more times that night than he had thought possible. Looking down at the favor tied to his belt, he felt a twinge of guilt. Twice he had danced with Marjorie, both times needing to keep it hidden. Yet here he was, allowed to dance with the Lord's granddaughters. While both girls were pleasant, they couldn't compare to Marjorie. Willa's giggles and Winifred's smile didn't hold a candle to Marjorie's lopsided grin or her playful smirk. Their dancing, though clearly well-trained, didn't make his heart race in the same way that dancing with Marjorie did. In fact, apart from Lady Mira, he found himself comparing them unfavorably to Marjorie all night. But Lord Howland's daughter was different. She intrigued him, mostly because she and her brother seemed to watch him intently whenever he turned to them. Jojen was odd, plain, and simple. The way he spoke and the look in his eyes set him apart, and yet he was no more than 7. Jon noticed that Mira was everything he was not. While he was quiet, she was lively; where he was serious, she was a jokester. As they danced, she asked him questions that surprised him. She wanted to know about Ghost. Had he taken him hunting yet? Had he let him run free in the north? These were things he never expected her to be interested in. He tried to clear his mind, knowing that if he didn't, he wouldn't find any rest that night. Ghost lay by the fire, his wolf seemingly content to be back in the north. Jon had thought the wolf would want to go hunting or at least run free outside the city. Yet, when they were shown to his rooms, Ghost simply lay down, happy to be there. Jon suspected that the large leg of elk he had been given played a part in that contentment. The rooms themselves were a pleasant surprise. He had expected to be given a room close to Lord Jaime, but instead, he was shown to the family wing. He had considered protesting, but thought better of it. Lord Wyman might take offense if he raised a fuss and refused the honor being offered to him. His egg lay untouched in its chest, still causing him the same problems he had encountered since their journey began. As he lay in bed, he looked longingly at the wooden chest, missing its presence. With a sigh, he turned over to try and sleep, but it wasn't long before the dream came. He saw a girl running from the hall, tears streaming down her face, tears of anger, tears of frustration. The courtyard was full, yet no one dared to get in her way as she rushed toward the entrance of the God's Wood. Sitting down in front of the heart tree, she shouted out in rage. Why can't they understand? Why can't they see? She hadn't expected her oldest brother to take her side. His own wild nature was being curbed, and he wouldn't allow anyone else the freedom he craved. Being denied, she murmured. Her quiet brother, whom she had thought would understand, seemed more concerned for his friend's feelings than for hers. As she heard footsteps behind her, she turned to see her youngest brother carrying something warm in a bowl. What's this? She asked. I thought you'd be hungry. It's been hours since you were inside. Has it really? I didn't notice, she replied, diving into the deliciously hot stew. What will you do? He pressed. I'll not marry him. I'll run away rather than marry that boy. Is he really that bad? He's a fool. He doesn't care for me. While I was there, he bedded at least 2 servants. I'll fucking kill him. Why didn't you tell me? It's no use. They're all against me, Father, Brandon, Ned. Only you are on my side, Benjen. I'll always be on your side, Lya. Jon woke up to find Ghost lying on the bed beside him, his head resting on Jon's chest. He had seen her, his mother. The smile on his face helped him ignore the pain in his heart. Then Jen, his uncle, knew. He knew she didn't want to marry Robert. So did his other uncle. What had his mother felt? Did he care more for his friend than for her? Was that true? Did he still care more for Robert's feelings than for his own sister's? Ghost woke up and licked Jon's face as he tried to make sense of these thoughts. Suddenly, Jon had an idea. He got out of bed, quickly washed, and dressed. Walking from the room, he began looking for the maester's chambers, Ghost following closely behind him. After encountering a serving girl who pointed him in the right direction, he climbed the stairs and knocked on the door. It took a few moments, but finally, the door creaked open. A stout blond man stood there, looking at Jon dismissively. But when he noticed Ghost, he reached out to pet the wolf. Ghost responded with a silent snarl, baring his teeth, which startled the man enough that he nearly slammed the door shut. Jon knocked on the door, and it swung open. "What do you want, boy?" the maester asked, peering at him. "Maester, I was wondering if you have some ink and parchment." "Who are you, boy?" "Jon Snow, maester." "Be off with you, lad." "I won't waste good parchment on an illiterate bastard," the maester replied, starting to close the door. "I'm sure Lord Jaime would be pleased to hear that," Jon said, grimacing at the lie. "Lord Jaime Lannister? You serve Lord Jaime, lad?" The maester's tone shifted, suddenly much friendlier. I do. I'm his squire." "Ah, you're that Jon Snow. Why didn't you say so? Come in, and bring your wolf with you." "Ghost is a direwolf, maester." "Indeed. How fascinating. I'd love to examine him if given the chance." Jon glanced at Ghost, who looked distinctly unimpressed. If the wolf could speak, Jon was sure he would have given the maester a rude retort. "I don't think Ghost would allow that, would you, boy?" Jon chuckled as the wolf vigorously shook his head in response. "Remarkable," the maester said, moving to a shelf and returning with parchment, a quill, and some ink. "I thank you, maester." "Think nothing of it, lad. Lord Jaime and I are kin, after all," the maester replied with a broad smile. Jon nodded, grateful, and stepped out, heading toward the nearest alcove. Fortunately, he found one with a large window seat. Sitting down, he began to draw. The first attempt was decent, but not quite right. It took him until the third sketch to capture the image he wanted. When he finished, he studied it closely. If only he had colored ink, he thought, he could do a better job. But it was as he remembered her. "Mother," he murmured softly, holding up the picture. Howland. When Jojen had come to him with news that they needed to go to White Harbor, Howland had accepted it without question. If Jojen said it was necessary, then it was the old gods guiding him. So, he, Mira, Jojen, and a few guards had made the journey and arrived just a few days ago. He had initially chosen to stay at the tavern his men frequented, wanting to familiarize himself with the area before meeting Wyman. Within just a few days, the purpose of their journey became clear. The news that Jon Snow was on his way filled him with a nervous excitement he hadn't felt in ages. To see Lyanna's son in the flesh was something he had longed for. He was taken aback by some of the gossip circulating around town. While it was no surprise that a tournament had taken place in King's Landing, the news that Lord Jaime Lannister was also coming to White Harbor was unexpected. He had assumed Jon would be traveling alone, but he was relieved Jaime was accompanying him. He wanted to gauge the man for himself. Despite the positive reports he had heard, this was still the man known as the Kingslayer, the one who had stabbed a king in the back. It troubled him to think that Lyanna's son was under the care of such a man, yet the feedback he received had eased his concerns. Still, it was far better to see Jaime in person and form his own opinion, especially since he had begun to doubt the reliability of his liege lord. Ned had disappointed him time and again, both in word and action. His treatment of Lyanna's son had enraged him, but oddly enough, it was Ned's behavior since the boy had left that irritated him even more. Wyman had informed him in a letter about what transpired during his visit, and it was after that, for the first time in years, that he had received an invitation to Winterfell, an invitation he had no intention of accepting. "Father, they've arrived," Mira said as she entered the room. "You saw them? You saw him?" he asked eagerly. "Aye, father. Both him and the wolf. He's enormous, bigger than any wolf I've ever seen. He's a dire wolf, Mira." What's the boy like? He seems nice, father. Friendly. The wolf seems friendly too, Mira replied, a smile spreading across her face. What do you say, Jojen? Is it time to visit? Merman's court, he said. It's time, father. We should make ourselves known. Howland sighed. He was a man who preferred to keep things close to his chest, but compared to his son, he was the most open person alive. His son never offered explanations until it was absolutely necessary, adhering to his belief that things needed to unfold in a particular way. So, they made their way to the new castle, where they were welcomed inside. Howland spoke briefly with Lord Wyman, unsure how to explain their visit. Aside from wanting to see Jon Snow, his other reasons remained unclear. That night at the feast, he finally had the chance to observe Jon closely, and the boy did not disappoint. It was evident that he was her son, though hints of the Dragon Prince's appearance and mannerisms were present as well. Howland had no doubt that those who knew the prince best would recognize his father in him before long, while those familiar with Lyanna would see only the she-wolf. A few times during the evening, he noticed Jojen clearly unnerving Jon, but Mira was quick to step in and smooth things over. At one point, Howland almost approached Jon, relieved when something else distracted the boy. He wasn't sure what he would say to him. Did Jon know the truth? If not, should Howland tell him? Would he be breaking his word to Ned? Fortunately, he didn't need to act. The night passed without incident, and he went to bed grateful for the respite. He knew he would need to speak to Jon in the morning, aware that he could provide answers to questions no one else could. But should he? His dreams that night were fitful, almost merging into one. He found himself on the Isle of Faces, surrounded by the weirwoods, their branches boxing him in. He could hear one whispered word over and over, Harrenhal. Suddenly, he was on the ground, feeling helpless as kicks rained down on him until a voice called out, saving him. They marched to war. He rode near his liege lord, who laughed with the stag. In a camp, he approached a tent, the sounds inside revealing someone coupling. Howland started to walk away, but the flap opened, revealing the imposing figure of the Lord of the Stormlands, who pushed in from behind. The young girl beside him seemed tiny in comparison. They rode through a desolate landscape, rocky terrain stretching ahead, dominated by a towering structure. Scattered on the ground were bodies draped in white cloaks, stained with blood, while one man remained alive, gasping for breath. Screams echoed from high within the tower. Howland was riding, cradling a babe in his arms, the child's dark eyes gazing up at him. His heart felt heavy, but he steeled himself to fulfill the vow he had made. A familiar voice emerged from the ether, echoing in his mind. He turned, hoping to catch a glimpse of her face or at least the horse she was undoubtedly riding, but found nothing. He was back in front of the tower, leaning down to pour liquid into the man's mouth. The man's purple eyes regarded him with sorrow. The voice returned, louder now, its words resonating clearly. He needs to know the truth, Howland. It's time. But I promised I would not tell, Howland protested. He promised too, Howland. You know what he promised, you heard it, did you not? I heard. Tell him. Tell him everything, about Arthur. It's time, Howland. Time for him to return, to serve the king. Tell him, and consider your debt paid in full. Waking abruptly, Howland understood what he must do. He dressed quickly and made his way to break his fast. At the table, his daughter and son sat with Wyman's granddaughters and the Tyrell boy, while Lord Jaime laughed beside them. The white wolf leaned against the table, snatching the sausage that Lyanna's boy was holding out for him. Father, good morning. Here, sit, Mira called, drawing everyone's attention to him. In a moment, Mira. Lord Jaime, Jon, may I have a word? Lord Reed. Jaime Lannister replied, confusion flickering across his face before he looked to Jon, who nodded and stood up.